Okay, well, I thought I'd do a quick pull down of a bunch of things on my MX60 because, you know, it's about time to do that sort of thing. I've had it for a couple of weeks, so I should probably go over all the bolts. So I thought I'd start with an interesting feature, which is the covers on all of the wheel axles. Okay, well, I've taken the screws out first, and they're actually no sign of any Permatex on them, so that's a good thing that I took them out. Now, you might think that that's just a decoration, but actually it's a lot more than that, because what it does is prevents water from getting down there. Now, I guess most people don't think about where is actually really important to not have water, but in the middle of your motor is definitely a place that you don't want to have water. Now, interestingly, this is a cover, and I believe that, I haven't pulled it off yet, but I believe that is actually all about just protecting the interior of the axle. Just like the wide wheel. Let's see if I can focus this in a little bit more. Just like the wide wheel, it uses the same kind of capture mechanism or design, so that the axle bolt so the axle nut is circular and sits in a recess. So even if it did loosen a tiny amount, it can't pop out. Okay, so now I'm going to do my usual trick of putting a little tiny bit of thread locker on the end of each of the bolts and put them back in. So I use Permatex. No, there's no advertising here, but I just simply prefer it over the Loctite. I guess I started using Permatex for other products quite some time ago, and so I just kept using it when the other thread lockers, when I started using thread lockers. Okay, so usual deal, just a drop on the surface of the tip, because it's only the tip that really makes any difference, and then wind that through into the, making really sure you don't cross thread it. Feels a bit firm. Don't know what's going on there. I might pull him out and have another look. So I'll just do all of these and get back to you. Just while I'm here, I'll say that it's interesting to see that the very tip of this is a bit shiny. Now, that's because some of the anodizing came off when it was screwed in. So it's another feature of Permatex that it actually acts as a barrier between the two metals in case they're dissimilar, and they will be, because that's aluminium and that's steel. Now, in terms of how tight you do these, they only need to be about as tight as you get with two fingers, and you don't need to be tightening it too much, because it's only a little screw and it's only into very fine thread. Why you might be tempted to tighten it more is if you aren't using a thread locker. But since we are using a thread locker, then the purpose of the fastener is to fasten that onto the thing, and the thread's just how it gets on there. While I'm over on this part of the bike, I'll pull this down and show you that bolt there, or nut, is actually for the steering head bearing, and on mine it was just a little bit too tight, and you could feel that in how much resistance the wheel had in turning. So I just backed it off a tiny amount, something like a 1/16 of a turn. But you've got to make sure that you've got a big spanner, because that's one hell of a big bolt there. Don't use multi-grips, and away you go. While here, I'll also mention that it's interesting just how well constructed this thing is. Like, have a go at these forks, will you? Like, that's just fucking impressive. Like if we just move this around here, we can see that that's actually sandwiched in there. So it's very, very solid and well made and really quite light because, you know, hollowed out wherever possible. While we're here, it's also worth having a look at just how solid this neck brace is here, that this bolts onto this steel section here, which then bolts onto the front of the case. So pretty much every part of it is very easily worked on and serviceable. The cabling all runs down the middle of this neck, so it's all very tidy. And pretty much everything that you would want to get at to look at is easily available. There's no two ways about it. This machine is actually as close to automotive as I've seen. Since we're down at the back here, I'll just grab my little container and mention that the design is kind of interesting because it reuses the same parts. So this little cup here is exactly the same part as is used on the front, which is nice because that, you know, again, automotive, that actually reduces, you know, the amounts of parts in the inventory. And you might notice that there's a little bit of water happening here, and that's because rain blew in underneath my house where this was actually parked out the back, and, you know, no big deal. I mean, you know, if it's gonna get ridden in the rain, it's gonna have to get stored in the rain. Well, not totally in the rain, I had a cover over it, but, you know, a lot of the stuff. So you can see that that's actually working because that's an interesting set of marks there, because there's dust all over it. Same sort of locking mechanism. And a really important point, which people forget, is that's a plug, right? So when I want to take my wheel off, compared to so many other scoots where you've got to thread shit all over the joint, I can just unplug it and take the wheel off. It makes my life so much easier for maintenance, which isn't something that went unnoticed in my assessment of pre-purchase. Now, I think it's a 4mm there, but it might be a bit bigger. Yep, it's a 4. No, it's a 3. Yeah, it's a 3mm. Now, when I first got the scoot, just make sure that this is oriented where I need it to be. When I first got the scoot, this, whoops, wrong one. This was actually undone. Well, not undone, but loose. So I had to make sure I tightened that one and that one, because and there's another one down here as well that it goes onto for the bottom shackle. But these two are the main connections between these side parts and this part of the swing arm. So it's pretty important that they all work well. Down in here, I'm thinking of actually replacing that with something a little bit more amenable, like maybe put some heavy duty nylon washer on the end of it, shim it down a bit, I don't know. But yeah, it collects a lot of dirt in there, but that's okay. The mudguard goes all the way down to about here, so, you know, that actually prevents a lot of dirt getting into the critical parts of the suspension. And looking at it, she's pretty dirty at the moment. Okay, let's move on. Okay, it's perhaps hard to spot, but I've just discovered when I got the light on it right that there is a very small hairline crack right there, which is particularly not uncommon in the plastics that McCain tends to provide. So there's that. Okay, well, it seems to be getting a fair bit darker at the moment, so I had to bump the ISO up, so it might be a bit more grainy. This is the folding mechanism on the beast, and as you can see, it ain't a quick operation, so you don't want to be folding it and unfolding it real often. It is, however, in compensation for that, very, very strong. So that's a pretty solid bolt through the guts there, and then when I get that out, which is just literally a bolt, it just goes up like that, and then I have to secure it from the front with the bolt that I just took off from it, and then that's it. And then you can replace that in there for storage. Now you might wonder what that little bit of green plastic is that I've put on there, and that's just basically electrical tape because I got sick of it rattling. So when that screws in there, you just screw it in firm and hopefully you won't lose it. But yes, that's said creature. There's the steering stem mechanism, and yeah, it's you should feel a little bit of friction in the front. Maybe this could be loosened up a little bit, but before it was quite tight, so you really felt like it was stiff. Now, you don't want to have it too loose because then the bearing can, you know, start to wear too fast. And you don't want to have it too tight because it makes steering difficult. And if you are finding that while you're steering it, that you're having difficulty picking a nice smooth corner and entering your corner in a nice arc, the chances are it's because this is too firm. So then you just have to pull that down, and there is a small rub thread on that. I'll just show you. Okay, so when you pull down that cup, which is just there as a dust cover, you can see the grub thread right there to loosen that to allow it to turn. Given the amount of grease in there, it's probably pointless putting any Permatex in there, but I'm hoping that if it does ever vibrate out, I'll notice it, and the chances are it'll get caught inside that little guy because he seals fairly firmly on the bottom as well. And it's very nicely cut and put together. Okay, what else can I show you? The battery compartment. Okay, well, underneath where you stand, there is the battery compartment. And you might notice that I've got a little bit of foam in there, which is to prevent the battery from rattling itself and rubbing all of this stuff off. As it turns out, all of the motor controllers are underneath that. I haven't popped it off to have a look yet, but it's really quite impressive. It's got a nice little seal all the way around, and down at the back here, it's even got a weep hole so that any water that might find its way in there is going to go down through the back and out, and all of the cables in the middle are actually covered, like the ones that run down the back, by metal, and the battery sits on top of it. Speaking of which, I'll just go and get the battery. Okay, well, here is the battery, said creature. Anyone who thinks that having a detachable battery is good so that you can take it inside, doesn't have to carry this up and down the stairs. Now, it's got a strap on the top for making it easier to pull in and out, and if you trust that, then you're a braver man than me. So I just put my piece of anti-rattle foam back in there, and I'll lower the battery in there, and you'll see it's a very snug fit, beautiful. And then you've just got an XT90 plug, and plug it in, and she's ready to roll. So it's like one of the major issues that anybody's going to have with one of these lithium-ion battery packs is replacing the battery pack. Well, I don't need to actually do anything with tools. I can just replace the battery pack if it ever gets fucked, which it might do, because these things do that. One of the last things I thought I'd show you was the construction of the box. It's easy to think of it as just a box, but you can see here how this solid piece of ribbed metal, it's actually ribbed to make it thinner on the inside, to reduce weight, fits in like a kind of a dovetail joint with this section that goes along the top, and it's actually an incredibly strong and rigid piece bolted down the sides. Let's see if we can, yes. So these bolts here hold this together in a sandwich. So this battery box is just amazing. I just have never seen anything of this sort of quality, and I don't like these kind of plugs. They're designed originally for microphones, but you know, what can I do? They're there, right? But you can see on the battery a display that is telling you what the percentage is. So even if you don't have it plugged into the bike, you can actually still know what's going on. So it's a pretty amazing piece of gear, and I'm pretty impressed with lots of aspects of it. Do I personally get more enjoyment out of riding this than my wide wheel? The answer is no. This does things that my wide wheel won't do. and sometimes I'm not even sure if actually, you know, they're important to me. Nonetheless, I found myself unable to resist buying it because it's just a piece of scooter history. Anyway, I'm going to have to now pull the battery out of it because I can't lift this goddamn thing off the workbench with the thing in it because it weighs 35 kilos. Don't believe what they tell you. The battery is 7.5. It's a heavy bitch. Hope you've enjoyed.